The massive crystalline chamber aboard Omega Prime station hummed with tension as representatives from 12 alien species gathered around the circular war table. The neutral space station floated silently in the void between galaxies, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with a soft blue glow that reflected off the various armor and exoskeletons of the assembled warriors. Commander Vexther of the Altarian fleet pressed his back against the cold metal wall, his 4 compound eyes constantly scanning the room. His chitinous carapace, once a brilliant purple, now bore the dull gray scars of countless battles. Deep gouges ran across his chest plates, where plasma bolts had nearly ended his life. But those were nothing compared to the invisible wounds that haunted his sleep cycles. At the head of the table sat General Mordock of the Zarian Empire, his massive bulk filling an entire section of the chamber. His 12 tentacles moved in agitated patterns as he manipulated holographic displays showing star charts and military positions. Each tentacle was as thick as a human torso, covered in bioluminescent spots that flashed angry red when he was disturbed. The situation grows worse by the day. Mordock's voice boomed through the chamber's translation matrix. Intelligence reports indicate the Terrans have established 3 new colonies in the disputed Kepler sector. Their expansion rate has increased by 40% in just 2 cycles. A series of angry clicks and growls erupted from various species around the table. The insectoid hivemaster Zarquan's wings buzzed with irritation while the reptilian, Duke Kestar's forked tongue flicked out to taste the fear in the air. Young Lieutenant Zindar of the Caltharian Defense Corps stood up abruptly, his scales gleaming with youthful arrogance. Fresh from the military academy on Calthor Prime, he had never seen actual combat, but his test scores were legendary. His species' natural predator instincts made them excellent soldiers, or so the textbooks claimed. With respect, General. Zindar's voice carried the confidence of untested youth. I fail to see why we're even discussing this minor threat. Humans are primitive mammals, barely out of their Stone Age. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their ships are slow and clunky. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles. He gestured dismissively at the holographic display showing human settlements. Look at their colonies scattered across space like seeds in the wind. No coordination, no central command structure. They're not even a proper civilization yet. Several younger officers nodded in agreement, their various appendages moving in species-specific gestures of approval. The Vorthan Captain Hexler's crystalline body chimed in harmony, while the gaseous nebula Admiral Flois pulsed with amused colors. Their space navy consists of modified cargo haulers, Zindar continued, warming to his subject. Their ground forces carry primitive ballistic weapons that can barely penetrate basic armor plating. I've seen the combat footage from border skirmishes. They flee at the first sign of superior firepower. The lieutenant's confidence grew as he saw nods of approval from his peers. One coordinated strike at their primary colony worlds would end this expansion immediately. They're cowards who've never faced a real military force. Soft-skinned primates who probably surrender the moment they see our battle fleets approaching. But as Zindar spoke, Commander Vexther noticed something the young officer missed. The truly veteran warriors in the room, those with actual combat experience, remained silent. Their expressions grew more troubled with each dismissive word. About human capabilities, the chamber's atmosphere grew heavy as all eyes gradually turned toward the scarred figure hunched in the shadows. Vexther felt their attention like physical weight pressing down on his damaged exoskeleton. His 4 eyes, once sharp and predatory, now held depths of something the others couldn't identify. Something that made even the fiercest warriors in the galaxy uncomfortable. General Mordock's tentacles slowed their agitated movement as he focused on the old commander, Vexther. His voice carried across the chamber with surprising gentleness. You've been unusually quiet during this discussion. Surely you have thoughts on the human situation? The question hung in the air like a live explosive. Every being in the chamber knew Vexther's reputation. The hero of the Andromeda campaign, the butcher of Proxima 7, the only Altarian to survive the massacre at Kepler Prime. His military record was legendary. His tactical genius unquestioned. But there was something else. Something whispered in dark corners of military bases across the galaxy. Vexter had fought in the Terran War 15 cycles ago. He was the only survivor in this room who had actually faced humans in ground combat. He had never spoken about it publicly. Vexter's mandibles clicked slowly, sound that made the translator matrix struggle to find equivalent expressions in other languages. Among his people, that particular clicking pattern meant only one thing: deep, bone-crushing fear. You want to know about humans? Vexter's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the chamber, every word carried clearly. His 4 eyes swept the room, meeting each gaze with an intensity that made hardened warriors look away. The old commander's scarred hands gripped the edge of the table as he slowly pulled himself upright. Ancient wounds protested, but he ignored the pain. Some things were more important than physical discomfort. Then listen carefully, he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. What I'm about to tell you may save your lives, or it may cost you your sanity. Because once you know the truth about humans, you can never unknown it. The chamber fell into absolute silence, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the station's engines. Even the most arrogant young officers sensed that something fundamental was about to change in their understanding of the Galaxy Commander. Vexter's claws scraped against the metal armrest. As memories flooded back like poison through his veins, the sound echoed through the silent chamber, each scrape marking another painful recollection he'd tried desperately to bury. Terra 7, he began, his voice hollow.
Ow!
That was the designation our fleet command gave it. Just another number on our expansion charts. The humans called it New Sol. Population 2.3 million, mostly farmers and miners. Our long-range scanners showed basic orbital defense platforms, maybe a few patrol boats. No military installations, no fortress worlds, no standing army. The old warriors for compound eyes focused on something beyond the chamber walls, seeing ghosts from 15 cycles past. Intelligence reports said it would be a simple occupation. Secure the agricultural zones, establish tribute collections, move the population to designated sectors. Standard procedure for primitive species. General Mordok's tentacles writhed. Slowly as he accessed holographic records, your fleet composition was impressive. 40 heavy cruisers, 15 dreadnoughts, 3 carrier groups. 200,000 ground troops from the finest legions in Altarian space. The Crimson Talons. Vexter nodded grimly. Elite shock troops who had conquered 18 worlds without a single major defeat. Veterans of the Andromedan Wars. Each warrior worth 10 ordinary soldiers. We thought we were bringing a hammer to crush an insect. The assembled officers leaned forward, their various forms of attention focused on the scarred commander. Young Lieutenant Zindar's scales gleamed. With anticipation, expecting to hear tales of glorious victory. We dropped out of hyperspace at dawn, local time, Vexter continued. Perfect tactical timing. Civilian populations are always confused and panicked when they wake up to find a battle fleet in their sky. The human orbital platforms were exactly as pathetic as our intelligence predicted. His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. 17 minutes. That's how long their entire orbital defense network lasted against our opening bombardment. Ancient fusion rockets, primitive kinetic barriers, communication arrays that belonged in a museum. Our gunners treated it like target practice. Captain. Hexler's crystalline body chimed with approval. Efficient elimination of defensive capabilities. Their civilian shipping was even more amusing. Vexter's voice grew colder. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining vessels, not a single ship attempted to flee. They just sat there in orbit like sitting prey, broadcasting distress signals on primitive radio frequencies. Lieutenant Zindar nodded approvingly, his youthful arrogance shining through. Exactly as expected from a weak species. They probably wet themselves at the first sight of real warships. Vexter's laugh was sharp and bitter, like breaking glass. That's exactly what we thought. Standard procedure called for a surrender demand before ground operations. Give the primitives a chance to submit peacefully. Avoid unnecessary casualties on both sides. The old commander's claws dug deeper into the armrest. The response came from their planetary communications center. Human voice, calm and clear despite the universal translator's limitations. He identified himself as Hansel, mayor of their primary settlement. Our fleet admiral gave him the standard terms: immediate surrender, relocation of population to designated sectors, tribute payments to begin within one planetary rotation. General Mordok's massive bulk shifted forward, and their response? 3 words, Vexter whispered. Just 3 words that should have warned us what we were walking into. Hansal's voice came back over the communication channel, steady as steel. Come and take it. The chamber stirred uneasily. Several younger officers exchanged glances, not understanding the significance. But the veterans in the room felt something. Cold crawl up their spines. We laughed. Vexter continued. The entire bridge crew thought it was hilarious. Primitive farmer, challenging the might of the Altarian Empire. Now Admiral ordered immediate ground deployment. 50,000 troops for the primary city. Another 100,000 spread across secondary targets. His 4 eyes closed as the memories became more vivid. I commanded the 7th Assault Division. 5,000 of our best warriors supported. By hover tanks and atmospheric fighters, our target was the city center. Expected resistance, minimal. The old warrior's breathing became labored as he relived the approach. The dropships descended through clear skies. Anti-aircraft fire. No fighter intercepts. The human civilian aircraft had been grounded at their spaceport in neat, orderly rows. It looked like they were preparing for occupation rather than resistance. Lieutenant Zindar leaned forward eagerly. Perfect conditions for rapid deployment. Perfect. Conditions for a trap, Vexter corrected harshly. We landed in the main plaza, expecting to face local police, or maybe some hastily organized militia. Instead, we found empty streets, complete silence, not a single human in sight. His claws began to shake as the memories intensified. That should have been our first warning. Evacuation was too complete, too organized. They had cleared every civilian through underground tunnel systems our orbital scans never detected.
Oh.
But we were arrogant. We thought they were simply hiding. In fear, the chamber hung on every word as Vexter's voice grew darker. The first sniper shot came from a 3rd-story window 2 blocks away. Perfect headshot through the optical sensors of our lead scout. Before we could react, the entire city erupted in gunfire. General Mordok's Stanicles stopped moving entirely. Ambush tactics. Every building had been converted into a fortress. Vexter's voice cracked. Every window held a marksman. Every rooftop concealed heavy weapons. Every street corner was trapped with explosives. They had turned their own city into a killing field and baited us right into the center of it. Filled with remembered terror, the human leading the Central District Defense was named Dalsu. Former mining foreman, no formal military training, but he commanded 200 civilians like they were elite commandos. Lieutenant Zindar's scales began to pale. But surely your superior numbers and equipment numbers meant nothing. Vexter's roar silenced the entire chamber. They fought like nothing we had ever encountered. No surrender, no retreat, no fear. They used our own tactics against us. Turned our strengths into weaknesses. The old commander's voice dropped to a haunted whisper. For 6 days, those 200 humans held off 5,000 of our finest warriors. They fought from sewers and storm drains. They sniped from ruins and rubble. They booby-trapped their own dead to kill our medics. His claws scraped the armrest. Raul, Dalsu himself became a legend among our troops. Broken left arm from shrapnel, 3 bullet wounds in his chest, still commanding his people through handheld radios. When we finally cornered him in the city hall basement, he was using weapons stripped from our fallen soldiers. The chamber was deathly quiet as Vexter finished his account. When the fighting finally ended, we found Dalsu's body surrounded by 400 of our dead. A mining foreman with a broken arm had personally killed more Altarian warriors than some of our generals manage in entire campaigns. The silence stretched on until General Mordok finally spoke. 400 casualties from 1 human defender? Vexter nodded slowly. And that was just the beginning of our education about what humans are truly capable of when when you threaten their homes. Commander Vexter's voice grew hollow as he continued, each word seeming to drain more life from his scarred form. The crystalline chamber's soft blue glow cast eerie shadows across his damaged carapace, as memories he'd tried to bury clawed their way back to the surface. The street fighting, the snipers, the booby traps, he said slowly. All of that was just traditional warfare with a human twist. But what came next changed everything we thought we knew about combat. General Mordok's massive tentacles writhed nervously, their bioluminescent spots flickering with anxious patterns. Commander, your reports mentioned unconventional tactics. What exactly did the humans do? Vexter's mandibles clicked in rapid succession, a sound that made the translation matrix struggle to find equivalent emotions in other languages. Among his people, that particular rhythm meant something close to existential dread. They studied us, he whispered. Not our weapons, not our tactics, not our ship designs. They studied us. It's our psychology, our fears, our cultural beliefs, our religious practices. Everything that made us who we were as species. The old warriors for compound eyes focused on a point in the distance, seeing ghosts that haunted his sleep cycles. There was a human female named Yunji, former university professor, taught something called xenoanthropology. When the war started, she became their intelligence coordinator. Captain Hexler's crystalline body chimed with confusion. Teacher became a military commander? That's what we thought too. Vexter's voice cracked. We intercepted her academic records. During the first week of occupation, published papers on alien cultural integration, guest lectures at their diplomatic academy. We figured she was some kind of liaison officer, maybe trying to negotiate surrender terms. His claws dug deeper into the armrest as the memories became more vivid. We were wrong. Yoongi had spent 20 years studying alien psychology for peaceful contact protocols. When war came, she turned all that knowledge into the most effective weapon we'd ever faced. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence as every being present began to understand the implications. Young Lieutenant Zindar's scales had begun to lose their vibrant color, a sign of stress among his people. Somehow, she had infiltrated our entire communications network, Vexler continued. Not just military channels, but personal messages, private conversations, even our religious broadcasts. She was listening to everything, learning about each species in our coalition force. Admiral Flois pulsed with nervous energy, her gaseous form shifting colors rapidly. That's impossible. Our encryption protocols are unbreakable. Human computer specialists had been quietly working as civilian contractors throughout the galaxy for decades, Dexter explained. Maintenance technicians, software developers, communications engineers, all perfectly legal, all completely innocent, until Yoongi activated them as intelligence assets. The horrifying scope of human preparation was beginning to dawn on the assembled officers. They had been under surveillance for years without knowing it. My people have strict religious laws about honoring the dead. Vexter's voice became barely audible. Desecrating corpses is the worst sin imaginable in our culture. It condemns the soul to eternal darkness. Yoongi learned this from intercepted funeral broadcasts. His 4 eyes closed in remembered anguish. She began recording footage of our fallen warriors being processed through their recycling systems. Industrial machines grinding up our dead, turning them into fertilizer for human crops. The sounds, the mechanical grinding, the conveyor belts, the complete absence of ceremony or respect. Several officers looked physically ill. The Vorthan captain's crystalline body had stopped chiming entirely. While the insectoid hive master's wings buzzed with distress, she broadcast these recordings on all military frequencies during our meal times, Vexter continued. Warriors who had fought bravely for days would suddenly hear the sounds of their fallen comrades being consumed by machines. Many couldn't eat for weeks afterward. Some refused to fight, knowing their bodies might suffer the same fate. General Mordok's tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of deep shock among his species. Psychological warfare targeting religious beliefs. It's unprecedented. But that was just the beginning. Vexer's voice grew even darker. The worst part was what they did to prisoners. A human called Taeon ran their interrogation operations. Former psychiatrist specialized in treating combat trauma, he understood exactly how warrior minds worked. The old commander's breathing became labored as he forced himself to continue. Taehyun didn't torture prisoners for military information. He already had everything he needed from Yunji's intelligence network. Instead, he tortured them to break their spirits, to send messages to the rest of us, Lieutenant Sindar found. His voice, though it shook with growing fear. What kind of messages? He would capture our soldiers during night raids, keep them for exactly 72 hours, then release them back to our lines, Vexthur explained. But he carved messages into their flesh using surgical precision, not random wounds, but carefully. Planned psychological attacks. Chamber was deathly quiet as every being waited for details they dreaded to hear. For Altarian prisoners, he carved symbols that represented shame and cowardice in our culture. For Zephyrians, he used patterns that triggered their claustrophobia. For Caltherians, he marked them with signs that indicated they had abandoned their honor codes. Vexthur's claws were shaking visibly now. Their returned prisoners weren't physically damaged beyond healing. But mentally, they were broken. They couldn't look at their fellow warriors without shame. They couldn't function in combat situations. Some took their own lives rather than face the disgrace. The psychological warfare had been surgical in its precision, targeting each species' deepest cultural fears and taboos. Yongji and Taehyun worked together to create customized terror for each alien species in our coalition. Jexer continued. They learned that Zephyrians suffer from severe claustrophobia, so they began collapsing underground tunnels with our scouts trapped inside. But they didn't just kill them quickly. They broadcast their death screams on all communication frequencies for hours. Admiral Flois's gaseous form shimmered with horror. They used our own rescue instincts against us. Exactly. Vexthur nodded grimly. They discovered that Caltherian honor codes require warriors to retrieve their fallen comrades for proper burial rites. So they began booby-trapping corpses with explosives. Our soldiers would approach their dead friends, and he didn't need to finish. The implications were clear to everyone in the chamber. For the Vorthins, they learned about your species' harmonic communication methods. They recorded the death songs of captured prisoners, then broadcast corrupted versions that drove your people into madness. For the Nebula Collective, they used chemical weapons that disrupted your gaseous forms, causing agonizing solidification. Lieutenant Zindar's scales had turned completely pale, almost transparent. That's not warfare, he whispered. That's pure evil. Vexthur's mandibles clicked once, slowly and deliberately. No, Lieutenant, that's not evil. Evil implies malice without purpose. What the humans did was far worse than evil. He fixed his four eyes on the young officer, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was human intelligence applied to warfare. They turned our own nature against us, used our strengths as weaknesses, made our cultural values into weapons for our destruction. They didn't fight us with superior technology or greater numbers. The old commander's voice cracked with the weight of terrible understanding. They fought us with perfect knowledge of exactly who we were and what we feared most. And they were just getting started. Commander Vexthur pushed himself up from his chair, his damaged exoskeleton creaking with the effort. The old warrior moved slowly toward the massive viewing port that dominated one wall of the crystalline chamber. Beyond the transparisteel, stars glittered like distant diamonds against the black void of space. 8 months, he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. 8 months of brutal fighting, and our tactical displays showed we were winning. 60% of the planet under our control. Human resistance pockets shrinking daily. Casualty ratios favoring our forces 3-1. The assembled officers watched as Vexthur's reflection appeared in the viewing port, his scarred form overlapping with the star field beyond. His 4 compound eyes stared into the darkness, as if searching for answers among the distant suns. Our fleet command was already planning the victory celebration, he continued. Admiral Corthan had ordered the construction of a new orbital station to oversee the tribute collections. The Altarian Colonial Authority was sending administrative teams to begin population management. General Mordok's tentacles moved in, slow, hypnotic patterns as he accessed tactical archives. Reports from that period show standard pacification progress. Resistance activity decreasing, infrastructure damage being repaired, civilian populations returning to designated sectors. That's what we thought. Vexter's voice grew hollow. We believed we were fighting a conventional war with unconventional tactics. Urban warfare, psychological operations, guerrilla resistance. All things we had encountered before on other worlds. Difficult, but manageable. His reflection in the transparent steel seemed to ripple as his form shook with remembered trauma. Intercepted a transmission on the morning of the 8th month. High-priority military communication from the Human Resistance Command Center. The voice belonged to someone called Minho, their overall military coordinator, Lieutenant Zindar. Leaned forward, his pale scales catching the chamber's blue light. What kind of transmission? A single message broadcast to all remaining human settlements across the planet, Vexter replied. 7 words that changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. Minho's voice was calm, almost conversational. If we cannot keep it, they cannot have it. The chamber stirred uneasily as the implications began to sink in. Captain Hexler's crystalline body stopped chiming entirely, while Admiral Flois' gaseous form shifted to deep purple, a color that indicated extreme alarm among her species. We didn't understand at first, Vexter continued. Our intelligence analysts thought it was a morale message, maybe a call for increased resistance activities. The psychological warfare teams assumed it was another attempt to intimidate our forces. His claws scraped against the viewing port as he pressed his hands against the transparent steel. We were wrong. It wasn't a threat or a rallying cry. It was an execution order. The old commander's breathing became labored as he forced himself to continue. At exactly noon local time, the entire planet began to explode. Not random destruction, not chaotic violence, systematic, methodical annihilation of everything that had made Terra 7 valuable to us. General Mordok's massive bulk shifted forward. Sabotage operations. Coordinated demolition on a planetary scale, Vexter corrected. Every major power plant simultaneously detonated. Fusion reactors, geothermal stations, solar collection arrays. The humans had spent months preparing demolition charges, timing sequences, fail-safe systems. His 4 eyes closed as the memories intensified. The explosions lit up the entire continent like a chain of artificial suns. Our orbital sensors registered energy releases equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons, but that was just the beginning. The chamber fell deathly quiet as every being present imagined the scope of destruction being described. House water treatment facilities across the planet began pumping industrial toxins into the supply networks, Vexter continued. Agricultural zones were doused with chemical accelerants and set ablaze. Mining operations were collapsed using precisely placed explosive charges. His voice cracked with the weight of terrible memory. The humans had turned their own world into a weapon and fired it at us. Every resource we had come to claim, every piece of infrastructure we needed for colonial administration, every strategic asset that made Terra 7 valuable was being systematically destroyed. Admiral Flois pulsed with confused colors. Why destroy their own civilization? It makes no strategic sense. Vexter turned from the viewing port to face the assembled officers, his scarred form silhouetted against the starfield. Because they understood something we didn't. We hadn't come to Terra 7 to conquer a people. We had come to acquire a prize. Functioning colony world with intact infrastructure, productive agricultural systems, and exploitable natural resources. The horrible logic of human strategy began to dawn on the alien commanders. They had been fighting for possession of assets that no longer existed. The humans turned their home into a liability, Vexter explained. Instead of a valuable colonial acquisition, we were left with a radioactive wasteland that would cost more to repair than it would ever generate in tribute payments. His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter admiration, brilliant tactical thinking. If they couldn't win the war, they made sure we couldn't win anything worth having. But the old warrior's expression grew even darker as he continued. The systematic destruction was devastating, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how it ended. Lieutenant Zindar's voice was barely a whisper. How did it end? Vexter's eyes fixed on the young officer with an intensity that made the Caltharian's scales ripple with involuntary fear responses. Our command center was located in the former human capital building, reinforced structure, excellent defensive positions, multiple escape routes. Admiral Corthan had made it his personal headquarters. The old commander's claws began to shake. As he relived the final moments, demolitions had been going on for 6 hours. Half the planet was burning. Our ground forces were in full retreat from the toxic zones. The Admiral was coordinating orbital evacuation procedures when she walked in. General Mordok's tentacles went completely still. A human child Vexter's voice broke. Couldn't have been more than 12 standard cycles old. Small for her age, wearing a school uniform that was somehow still clean despite the chaos outside. She had long black hair tied back with a bright red ribbon. The silence in the chamber was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of life support. Systems. She walked past our security checkpoints like they didn't exist, Vexter continued. Smiled at the guards, waved at the officers, carried what looked like a science project in her arms. Some kind of display board with colorful diagrams and handwritten notes. His 4 eyes closed as he forced himself to continue. The guards thought she was a refugee child looking for her parents. One of them even offered her water in emergency. Rations. She thanked him politely in perfect Altarian, then walked straight into the command center. Captain Hexler's crystalline form began to vibrate with harmonic distress. Security protocols should have prevented civilian access. She wasn't a civilian, Vexter whispered. Her name was Soyoung, and she was the final weapon in humanity's arsenal. The school project she carried was a miniaturized radiological device, fusion-powered, magnetically contained, completely undetectable by our standard sensors. The horrible truth was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. She walked up to Admiral Corthan's tactical display, set down her project, and activated the device, Vexler continued. The Admiral had just enough time to realize what was happening before the containment field failed. His voice became barely audible. Her last words, broadcast on all communication frequencies as the device armed itself, were spoken in perfect Altarian. "This is our home. You're not welcome here." The explosion had vaporized the entire command center, along with Admiral Corthan and his entire staff. But more than that, it had delivered a message that echoed across the galaxy. A 12-year-old child had destroyed our command structure with a smile and a science project. They're finished. That's when we finally understood what we were really fighting. Not just human soldiers or human weapons, but human determination. The absolute refusal to surrender, even in the face of certain death. Chamber remained silent as the implications of Soyoung's sacrifice sank in. The humans hadn't just been fighting for military victory. They had been fighting for something far more dangerous to galactic stability. They had been fighting for the idea that some things were worth more than survival itself. Commander Vexter turned away from the viewing port, his scarred form moving slowly back toward the assembled officers. The starlight behind him cast long shadows across the crystalline chamber as he prepared to deliver the final, most terrifying truth about humanity. The war officially ended 72 hours after Soyoung's sacrifice, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. Our remaining fleet commanders received direct orders from Altarian High Command to begin immediate withdrawal procedures. According to every tactical assessment, we had achieved our primary objectives. General Mordok's tentacles writhed with confusion, but the planet was under your control. Resistance activity was contained. Victory parameters had been met. Vexter's laugh was sharp and bitter, echoing off the chamber walls like breaking glass. Victory? Yes, we controlled Terra 7. We controlled a radioactive wasteland where the air was toxic, the water was poisoned, and every shadow might hide a human sniper waiting to put a bullet through your optical sensors, is the old warriors for compound. Eyes swept the room, noting how even the most battle-hardened veterans were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The psychological impact of his story was achieving exactly what human warfare had accomplished 15 cycles ago. Every supply convoy that landed faced ambush attacks, he continued. Magnetic mines attached to transport vehicles. Improvised explosive devices hidden in cargo containers. Chemical weapons deployed against our logistics personnel, the humans, had turned supply line management into a death sentence. His claws scraped against the metal chair as he gripped it for support. Our occupation forces were dying at a rate of 50 soldiers per day. It's not from major battles or tactical engagements, but from constant harassment, sniper fire from abandoned buildings, booby traps in former human homes, poisoned food supplies that somehow made it past our testing protocols. Lieutenant Zindar found his voice, though it trembled with growing horror. Surely your advanced technology, your superior firepower you still don't understand? Vexler's roar silenced the entire chamber. His 4 eyes blazed with an intensity that made even General Mordek's massive form shrink back. Everything I've told you about Terra 7, every tactic that nearly broke the finest military force in Altarian history, none of it came from professional soldiers. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the soft hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause as the implications of those words sank in. The urban warfare specialists who turned their city into a killing field were construction workers and architects. Vexler continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier shouts. Operations that drove our warriors to madness were conducted by teachers and university professors. His mandibles clicked in patterns that the translation matrix couldn't properly interpret. The demolitions expert who coordinated the planetary destruction was a mining foreman named Minho. The intelligence coordinator who infiltrated our communications was a cultural anthropologist named Yoonji N.K. Captain Hexler's crystalline body had stopped chiming entirely, its usual harmonic vibrations replaced by an eerie silence that indicated shock beyond the ability to process. Dulsu, who held off 5,000 of our elite warriors for 6 days, was a civilian mining supervisor with no formal combat training, Vexler explained. Taehyun, who broke our prisoners' minds with surgical precision, was a psychiatrist who treated trauma victims before the war started. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs as officers tried to process what they were hearing. The implications were staggering. Human civilians were this dangerous. What were their actual military forces capable of? The Korean Defense Force, the Terran Marines, the special operations units that our intelligence had identified as primary threats. Vexler continued, they never fully engaged our forces. Do you know why? Admiral Flois pulsed with nervous energy, her gaseous form shifting through rapid color changes. Strategic reserves for counterattack operations. They were busy evacuating non-combatants and preparing secondary defensive positions, Vexler replied. While we were fighting their farmers and teachers, their actual military was setting up the next level of resistance. We would have faced if we'd tried to expand beyond Terra 7. The color drained from every face in the room as the true scope of human military capability became clear. If civilians had nearly destroyed an entire fleet, what would professional soldiers accomplish? We negotiated withdrawal, not because we were militarily defeated, Dexter explained, but because the cost of maintaining our victory had become unbearable. Every day we remained on Terra 7, we lost more ships to sabotage, more soldiers. 2 guerrilla attacks, more officers to psychological warfare. His 4 eyes closed as he remembered the final days of occupation. Our medical facilities were overwhelmed with soldiers suffering from combat stress reactions. Warriors who had conquered 18 worlds without flinching were having nervous breakdowns from fighting human children with improvised weapons. The old commander's voice cracked with the weight of terrible memory. The humans had turned resistance into an art form. Every aspect of their society became a weapon pointed at our forces. Their recycling systems were psychological warfare. Their school children were walking bombs. Their farmers were tactical geniuses. General Mordek's tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of profound shock among his species. Commander, are you saying that human military doctrine involves total civilian participation in warfare? I'm saying that humans don't distinguish between soldiers and civilians when their homes are threatened, Vexler replied. Everyone fights. Everyone contributes. Everyone dies if necessary. They turned their entire species into a military force. The implications were terrifying. Most galactic species maintained clear distinctions between military and civilian populations. The idea of total war involving entire populations was almost incomprehensible. The final negotiation took place aboard our command ship, Vexter continued. The representative was a human named Ginwu, some kind of diplomatic official. Polite, professional, spoke perfect Altarian. He even apologized for the casualties we had suffered. His claws began to shake as he remembered that final meeting. Jinwu was sympathetic about our losses, understanding about our need to withdraw with honor. He helped arrange prisoner exchanges, medical evacuations for our wounded, even provided intelligence about remaining booby traps in areas we needed to traverse. Lieutenant Zindar leaned forward. That sounds almost ... civilized. It's what made it so terrifying, Vexter whispered. As we concluded the negotiation, Jinwu walked me to the transport dock. We shook hands in the human fashion, a gesture of mutual respect between former enemies. The chamber held its breath as Vexter prepared to deliver his final revelation. As I was boarding the transport, Jinwu called out to me. His voice was still friendly, still professional. He said, "Commander Vexter, I hope there are no hard feelings about the conflict. After all, you fought our civilians and nearly broke under the pressure. I pray to whatever gods you worship that you never have to face our actual military." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every officer in the chamber understood the implication. The humans had been holding back. Everything they had endured, the urban warfare, the psychological operations, the scorched earth tactics, had been accomplished by amateurs. That was 15 cycles ago, Vexter said, returning to his chair with the slow movements of someone carrying an unbearable burden. Since then, human expansion has accelerated beyond all projections. Their technology has advanced at impossible rates. Their military capabilities have grown exponentially. He gestured toward the viewing port where stars twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, in human space, they remember Terra 7. They remember what we did to their people. They study our tactics, our weaknesses, our cultural fears. His 4 eyes swept the chamber one final time, meeting each gaze with an intensity that burned the memory into their minds. And they're preparing for the day when someone else makes the same mistake we did. The old warrior stood slowly, his scarred exoskeleton creaking with age and old wounds. My advice to this council is simple. Leave the humans alone. Trade with them, if you must. Negotiate with them, if you can. Even befriend them, if possible. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But never ever make them your enemy. Because if you do, you'll discover that there's no force in the galaxy more terrifying than a human who has nothing left to lose. As the War Council began to disperse in stunned silence, various officers filing out through the chamber's exits, with expressions of shell-shocked understanding, Commander Vexter remained at the viewing port. His reflection in the transparisteel showed a warrior who had seen the future of galactic warfare and found it wearing a human face. In the distance, beyond the reach of current technology, but not beyond the reach of human ambition, colonies were growing, ships were building. The species that had turned farmers into tactical geniuses was quietly preparing for whatever challenges the galaxy might bring. The old Altarian warrior knew that somewhere in human space, teachers were studying alien psychology. Construction workers were designing urban warfare tactics. And children were learning that sometimes the greatest victory came from making your enemy's victory too costly to bear. 15 cycles had passed since Terra 7, but Vexter knew with absolute certainty that the humans had not forgotten, had not forgiven, and had not stopped preparing. The end.